The moment the blade goes through my chest, the whole arena goes silent. Not because I'm dying, because everyone already thinks I'm nothing, and nothing doesn't bleed this much. I hit the ground. My vision goes white, then red, then nothing at all. Somewhere above me I hear laughing. Actual laughing. 300 students watching the Academy's worst Awakener get skewered in under 4 seconds, and half of them are cheering like it's the highlight of their semester. Here's the part they don't expect. I open my eyes. The wound is gone. My uniform is soaked in blood that isn't there anymore. I stand up slowly, roll my neck, and look directly at the boy who just killed me, and I smile. Callan Draith's sword is still shaking in his hand. His face goes from smug to confused to something close to fear in under 2 seconds. And that right there, that exact expression, is the whole reason I train the way I do. Nobody in that arena knows what just happened. They think it's a glitch, a trick, a cheap illusion spell. It's not. It's the single most humiliating, most underestimated power ever granted at this school, and it belongs to me. Somewhere in the front row, I hear a girl's sharp intake of breath. Sarah. She's the only person in this entire arena who isn't confused right now. She's terrified, because she's the only one who's starting to understand exactly what she's looking at. My name is Idris Voss, and 3 years ago, when the Academy's ranking stone read out my awakening result in front of the entire incoming class, the room actually gasped. Not in excitement, in pity, resurrection, passive, rank F, unusable in ranked combat, unusable in duels, unusable, unusable, unusable. That's what the examiner said, word for word, while I stood there in front of 600 new students who would spend the next 3 years treating me like a walking joke. I remember exactly how that felt. 600 faces turning to look at me at once, and every single one of them already deciding who I was before I'd said a word. Some laughed outright, some just looked away, embarrassed for me. The kindest reaction I got that day was pity, and pity from strangers is somehow worse than mockery. Here's what the examiner didn't know, what none of them knew. My skill doesn't just bring me back from the edge of death, it brings me back from actual death. Full stop. No conditions, no cooldown that matters. As long as my soul thread doesn't fully snap, which takes a lot more punishment than anyone realizes, I get back up. Every single time. You'd think that makes me the strongest person in the building. It doesn't, because resurrection comes with a brutal cost that the examiners conveniently forgot to mention. Every death drains my stats. My strength, my speed, my mana, all of it resets to a percentage of what it was. Die once, lose a slice of yourself. Die enough times in a row, and eventually there's nothing left to bring back. That's the trade. Immortality with a countdown clock nobody can see except me. So for 3 years, I let everyone believe I was garbage. I lost duels on purpose. I tanked my class rankings. I let people like Callan use me as a punching bag in front of professors who should have known better, and I smiled through every single humiliation, because the whole time, I had a secret. I wasn't losing, I was training. Let me tell you what that actually looked like, because it wasn't glamorous. It wasn't some montage where I gritted my teeth and got stronger in a single afternoon. It was 3 years of doing the single most unreasonable thing an Awakener can do to himself. On purpose, alone, in the dark, with nobody watching and nobody to impress. See, there's a place beneath the Academy that most students never find. An old collapsed dungeon sealed off after 17 apprentices died there in a single semester 20 years ago. Everyone calls it the Grave Vault. Everyone avoids it. Everyone except me, because for someone with my skill, a dungeon where you're supposed to die isn't a death sentence. It's a gym. I found it in my first month here, completely by accident, chasing a bet I lost on purpose to Callan just to get out of the eyes of the crowd. I fell through a broken floor tile, landed on a stone platform slick with old blood, and got torn apart by something with too many teeth before I even understood where I was. I woke up an hour later on the same platform, stats reduced, body screaming, and completely alone in the dark. And for the first time since my awakening, I felt something other than shame. I felt opportunity. I sat there in the dark for a long time that first night, listening to whatever had killed me shift and breathe somewhere in the black beyond the platform, and I did the math anyone sane would have run away from. If I couldn't actually die down here, then every single risk everyone else in this school treated as fatal was, for me, just information, a lesson, a rehearsal I could run as many times as I needed until I got it right. Most people get one shot at learning to survive something that wants to kill them. I got unlimited attempts. That thought alone kept me climbing back down those broken stairs, night after night, long after any reasonable person would have stopped. The first 10 times were the worst. I won't pretend otherwise. Pain doesn't disappear just because death does, and resurrection brings back the body, not the memory of agony. I remember every single one of those deaths. I remember the exact second the fangs closed, the exact second the claws opened me up, and every single time, I got back up and walked back in. There were nights I sat on that bloody stone platform afterward, shaking, telling myself I'd stop, that this was insane, that no version of getting stronger was worth feeling my own ribs cave in over and over. And then I'd think about the ranking stone, about 600 faces laughing, about Callan's smirk every single time he won against me in a duel I'd already decided to lose before it started. So I went back down anyway. Every night. That became the whole shape of my life. By the 40th death, I stopped flinching. By the 100th, something changed. I started noticing details the monsters gave away right before they struck. Little tells. A shift in weight before a lunge. A flicker in the eyes before a killing blow. Things you can only learn by being killed enough times to memorize the pattern of your own death. And slowly, painfully, I started dodging instead of dying. The stat drain became slower. The recoveries became stronger. And something started building inside me that no ranking stone in this school had a name for, because nobody had ever farmed it this way before. They call it threshold growth. A hidden stat that only increases at the exact moment your soul survives what should have ended it. Most Awakeners touch it once or twice in a lifetime, usually during some near-fatal battle they're lucky to walk away from. I touch it every single night, on purpose, over and over, until it stopped being rare and started being routine. While my public rank stayed frozen at the very bottom of the school, my real power kept climbing in a place nobody thought to look. By the end of my second year, I could clear the upper half of the grave vault without dying once. By the start of my third, I'd stopped being afraid of the dark down there at all, because I understood something my classmates never had to learn the hard way. Fear only works on things you can lose. I'd already lost everything I was ever going to lose the first time that ranking stone called me worthless in front of the whole school. There was one night, though, about 2 months before the duel, that almost ended everything anyway. I'd gone deeper into the grave vault than I ever had, chasing a section I'd never cleared, convinced my stats could handle whatever waited down there. They couldn't. Something with too many legs and not enough mercy tore through 3 of my resurrections in under a minute, faster than my body could recover between deaths, and for the first time since I found that place, I felt something close to real fear. My 4th death that night came slower than the others. My stats had dropped so far that I genuinely didn't know if a 5th resurrection would even trigger. I lay there in the dark, half convinced this was finally the night the countdown ran out, and the only thought running through my head was how stupid it would be to die for real down here, unnoticed, with nobody at that school ever knowing what I'd actually built myself into. I got up anyway, barely. Crawled back to the stairs on stats so low a first year could have beaten me in a straight fight, and made a decision right there on those steps that I hadn't let myself make before. I wasn't just training anymore. I was preparing for something, even if I didn't know yet what that something was. 2 months later, Callan gave it a name. That's the part that made the arena moment inevitable. Callan didn't know he was about to humiliate someone who had already died over 300 times and simply chosen not to fight back. Because here's the thing. Nobody tells you about growth in this world. The system doesn't reward comfort, it rewards threshold moments, the split second right before death where your soul either breaks or hardens. Most Awakeners spend their entire lives avoiding that moment. I get to live in it on purpose, over and over, without the one consequence that stops everyone else. So that became my routine. Every night after curfew, while my classmates studied formations and dueling stances in comfortable, safe training halls, I climbed down into the grave vault and let something kill me. The first 10 times were the worst. I won't pretend otherwise. Pain doesn't disappear just because death does, and resurrection brings back the body, not the memory of agony. I remember every single one of those deaths. I remember the exact second the fangs closed, the exact second the claws opened me up, and every single time, I got back up and walked back in. By the 40th death, I stopped flinching. By the 100th, something changed. I started noticing details the monsters gave away right before they struck. Little tells. A shift in weight before a lunge. A flicker in the eyes before a killing blow. Things you can only learn by being killed enough times to memorize the pattern of your own death. And slowly, painfully, I started dodging instead of dying. The stat drain became slower. The recoveries became stronger, and something started building inside me that no ranking stone in this school had a name for, because nobody had ever farmed it this way before. They call it threshold growth, a hidden stat that only increases at the exact moment your soul survives what should have ended it. Most Awakeners touch it once or twice in a lifetime, usually during some near-fatal battle they're lucky to walk away from. I touch it every single night, on purpose, over and over, until it stopped being rare and started being routine. While my public rank stayed frozen at the very bottom of the school, my real power kept climbing in a place nobody thought to look. That's the part that made the arena moment inevitable. Callan didn't know he was about to humiliate someone who had already died over 300 times and simply chosen not to fight back. Let me back up, because the duel didn't come out of nowhere. It came from a girl. Her name is Sarah Lind, and she's the only person at this academy who ever looked at me like I was more than a rounding error. She's a Rank A Awakener, top of our year, gifted with a healing and perception skill so precise she can read the flow of mana in a person's body just by watching them breathe. Everyone assumed she'd end up paired with Callan for the Academy's showcase tournament, since he was the strongest boy in our class and she was the strongest girl, and appearances matter more than they should in a place like this. I noticed her a long time before she noticed me. She was the kind of student professors bragged about in front of visiting officials, the kind of name that got announced over hallway speakers when she placed first in another regional trial. I was the opposite of that in every measurable way, so naturally I assumed she'd never have a reason to know my name at all. Then one afternoon, about a year ago, she caught me limping out of a supply corridor near the eastern stairwell, soaked in sweat, favoring a leg that should not have been able to hold my weight. I told her I'd fallen. She didn't believe me. She never said anything about it either, which somehow made it worse, because it meant she was watching, quietly, filing away details about me that didn't add up. A few weeks later, she started sitting near me in theory classes. Not next to me, not obviously, just close enough to ask the occasional question about a training method I'd casually mentioned, close enough that I started noticing the pattern before I let myself believe what it meant. She didn't want him. She wanted to study under the one professor who still believed there might be something worth understanding in a skill labeled Rank F, and that professor happened to be mentoring me in secret, quietly, off the books, because even she wasn't sure what she was looking at. Sarah figured out enough of the truth on her own, long before I ever confirmed it out loud. She never said the word resurrection to my face, not once, but I could tell from the way she'd study my hands after a rough week, checking for scars that weren't there, that she already suspected I was surviving something nobody else knew about. Callan didn't take rejection well. He never does. So 1 week before the showcase, he cornered me in the training hall, in front of half our class, and said the words that changed everything. If you're so pathetic that even Voss looks like a better use of her time, then let's settle it in the arena. Public duel. Loser transfers out of advanced combat theory. Winner takes her seat next to me for the showcase. He said her name like she was a prize. She said nothing, because she didn't get a vote, and that's exactly the kind of thing that makes my blood run hot in a way 3 years of humiliation never managed. I could have said no. I'd built a career out of losing on purpose, but something about the way Sarah's jaw tightened, the way she looked at the ground instead of at either of us, made the decision for me before I even opened my mouth. I said yes. The whole school heard about it within the hour. By the next morning, it wasn't a duel anymore. It was an event, posted on every notice board, whispered about in every hallway. The worst Awakener in Academy history against the strongest boy in our year, fighting over a girl who never asked to be the prize. Nobody bet on me. Nobody even considered it. I heard 2 second-years outside the dining hall openly debating whether the professors would even let the match happen, worried it might actually kill me on the spot, and one of them laughed and said I should just skip the whole thing and save everyone the embarrassment. If they'd known what I was doing every single night in the grave vault, they would have understood that concern was pointed in exactly the wrong direction. Sarah found me the night before, sitting alone on the roof access stairwell, the one place in the whole building nobody else bothers to check. She didn't ask me to back out. She just sat down next to me, quiet for a long time, and finally asked why I was really doing this, because she knew, better than anyone, that I never fought unless I'd already decided to lose. I told her the truth, most of it anyway, I told her I was tired of watching people decide what she was worth without asking her. She didn't say anything to that. She just looked at me for a long moment, like she was recalculating something, and told me to be careful, which from her felt like more than most people's entire pep talks combined. The morning of the duel, I did something I'd never done before. I let myself actually think about how strong I'd become instead of hiding it, even from myself. I ran the numbers I'd tracked in secret for 3 years. Threshold growth stacked far past anything a normal student should have access to at our age. Reaction speed built from 400 remembered deaths. Pain tolerance that no longer registered as pain, just information. I thought about every single night on that bloody stone platform. Every claw mark, every collapsed lung, every single time I'd told myself this had to be worth something eventually. For the first time, I let myself wonder if I was actually strong. Then I walked into that arena and let Callan's sword go straight through my chest anyway. Here's the part I didn't explain earlier, the part that matters. I didn't dodge on purpose. I wanted every single person in that crowd to watch me die exactly the way they expected me to. I wanted Callan smug, I wanted the crowd laughing, I wanted Sarah's face to fall in horror, because all of that was about to become the setup for the only moment of my life that actually counted. So when I got back up, blood gone, wound gone, smiling straight at the boy who just killed me in front of everyone he cared about impressing, the silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Callan took a step back, just one, but I saw it, and so did everyone else. "Give it up, Voss," he said, though his voice didn't have the same weight it did 30 seconds earlier. "Whatever trick that was, it's not going to save you twice." It wasn't a trick, and it wasn't going to happen twice, because I wasn't planning on dying again. What happened next moved fast enough that half the crowd only understood it in replay. Callan lunged first, the same opening move he'd used on me 100 times before, the one I'd memorized down to the exact angle of his shoulder from watching him drill it in the training hall for 3 years. I stepped inside the swing before he finished committing to it, close enough that his sword became useless dead weight in his hand. He tried to reset. 400 deaths taught my body exactly where an opponent's balance breaks before the opponent even feels it happening. I hit him once, controlled, precise, enough to put him flat on his back without doing real damage, because the point was never to hurt him. The point was to show him exactly how small his strongest attack actually was. He tried to get up. I put a foot on his chest, gently, almost lazily, and looked out at the crowd instead of at him. Anyone else want to test the worst Awakener in Academy history? Nobody answered. Nobody moved. Somewhere behind me, a student dropped a training staff on the stone floor, and the sound echoed like a gunshot in the silence. Nobody laughed at that one. 3 years of laughing at me, and in one single moment, every single person in that arena forgot how. Sarah stood at the edge of the arena with her hand over her mouth, and I swear even from that distance I could see her trying to recalculate every single thing she thought she knew about me. Part of me wanted to say something clever right then, some line that would land perfectly and get repeated in hallways for the rest of the semester. I didn't. I just stood there, foot still on Callan's chest, and let the silence do the talking for me. Because honestly, after 3 years of being talked over, silence felt better than anything I could have said out loud. The professor's reaction was worse for Callan than mine was. The head of the combat department, a scarred old Awakener named Director Halden who'd spent 3 years writing me off in every progress report, walked into that arena, looked down at Callan on the ground, then looked at me standing over him without a scratch, and said the words I'd been waiting 3 years to hear. "Explain, now." I didn't, not right away. I let the silence stretch, let every rumor and theory swirl through the crowd, because after 3 years of being underestimated, I'd earned the right to enjoy watching them all scramble for an explanation that wasn't coming easily. Someone in the crowd whispered that I must have hidden a second awakening. Someone else insisted the whole thing was staged, that Callan must have pulled his strike on purpose, which would have been almost funny if it hadn't come with the exact same dismissive tone people used on me for 3 straight years. Even now, even after everything they'd just watched, some of them still needed a reason that didn't involve admitting they'd been wrong about me the entire time. Director Halden didn't wait for the crowd to settle. He grabbed my shoulder, hard, and walked me out of that arena himself, past a wall of stunned faces and one girl standing perfectly still near the exit, with her hand still pressed over her mouth. Sarah didn't say a word as I passed her. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. somewhere between relief and disbelief and something that looked a lot like she was already grieving every version of me she thought she'd understood. In his office, Halden didn't yell. That almost would have been easier. He sat across from me, pulled out my original Awakening file, the one stamped Rank F in bold red ink, and slid it across the desk without a word. I looked at it for a long time before I finally told him everything. The grave vault, the 3 years, the 400 deaths. Threshold growth, a stat he admitted he'd never even heard named out loud before. He asked me why I never came to a professor about any of it, why I chose to disappear into a condemned dungeon alone night after night, instead of asking for help from people whose entire job was training awakeners like me. I told him the truth, because for 3 years, nobody at this academy looked at me like I was worth helping. They looked at me like I was a box that had already been checked, a name on a roster that existed mostly to make everyone else's ranking look better by comparison. He didn't argue with that. He just sat there for a long moment, rubbing a scar along his jaw, looking older than I'd ever seen him look in 3 years of lectures. He didn't look impressed, he looked afraid, which honestly scared me more than anything Callan's sword had done that day. That should have been the end of the story. The bully humiliated. The secret revealed, the girl impressed. Roll credits, cue the triumphant music, everyone learns a lesson about judging people by their starting rank. It wasn't the end. It was the exact moment my life actually became dangerous. Because resurrection isn't a secret the Academy keeps for sentimental reasons. Skills that let a person survive death indefinitely are classified, monitored, and in some cases hunted. And the second Director Halden reported what he saw in that arena, word didn't just spread through the student body. It reached people outside the school. People who'd spent years searching for exactly this kind of awakener, for reasons that had nothing to do with academic curiosity. 3 days after the duel, a man in a black Academy inspector's coat showed up at Director Halden's office, asking specifically for me by name, carrying a file that shouldn't have existed, containing details about my awakening that even I didn't know. That's when I learned the ranking stone lied to me on the very first day. Resurrection was never actually rank F. Someone had forged that result on purpose, buried the true classification, and let the entire academy believe I was the weakest student in 3 years, all so nobody would come looking for what I actually was. And whoever did that burying job wasn't finished with me yet. The inspector introduced himself simply as a representative of something called the Ashline Bureau, a name I'd never once heard in 3 years of academy lectures, which should have told me everything about how far outside normal channels this conversation was about to go. He didn't ask permission to sit down. He just did, set that impossible file on the desk between us, and asked me a single question that made my stomach drop before he even finished the sentence. Do you know why your parents disappeared, Idris? Or did the academy tell you they simply left? I didn't have an answer. I'd been told my parents died in a border skirmish before I could walk, a story so old and so ordinary that I'd never once questioned it. The look on his face told me that story was as fake as my ranking result, and he wasn't finished delivering bad news. He didn't come to congratulate me. He came to recruit me, quietly, urgently, for something involving a sealed dungeon far larger and far older than the grave vault beneath our school, a place the academy had been hiding from its own students for 2 decades, guarded by something that apparently only an awakener who couldn't permanently die had any real chance of surviving. Director Halden's face went pale in a way I'd never seen from him before. And for a man who'd spent 30 years training students to walk toward danger without flinching, that told me more than anything the inspector actually said out loud. Callan thought he'd lost a duel over a girl. He had no idea he'd just cracked open a secret that 3 separate factions had been quietly circling for years, and that the worst awakener in academy history was about to become the only person capable of walking into the one place nobody else could return from. I stood in that office long after the inspector left, staring at a file with my name on it that existed before I could even talk, thinking about a ranking stone that called me worthless on purpose, about a girl standing frozen near an arena exit, about a bully who still had no idea how small his sword actually was compared to what was coming for both of us. 3 years of being underestimated just turned into something I never asked for and can't walk away from. Somewhere out there, Callan was probably nursing a bruised chest and an even more bruised ego, already telling himself some version of the fight that let him keep his pride intact. He had no idea the duel wasn't even the real story. He had no idea that the girl he tried to claim like a prize had just watched me become someone the entire academy would spend years trying to understand. And he definitely had no idea that the file sitting on Halden's desk had my name on it before I ever took a single breath. I walked out of that office into a hallway gone unnaturally quiet, uniform still stiff with blood that wasn't mine to keep, and for the first time in 3 years, nobody looked at me like I was nothing. They looked at me like they were afraid to find out what I actually was.